Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge. Today I am so excited to be bringing you a weekly wrap-up. We are a day late with this, but you know what? It was worth it. I know for a lot of you that it was Mother's Day yesterday. I'm filming this on Mother's Day, but it will be going up the next day. I had my sister and my nieces staying with me. Mother's Day is particularly difficult for my sister, who, I've shared this before, my sister is not my sister by blood, she's actually my cousin, and my sister's mom, or my aunt, died 8 years ago on, not on Mother's Day, but a couple months before, and so Mother's Day is pretty painful. So we always try to kind of be busy and do something together so that, you know, she feels very loved and surrounded by love and everything. So anyway, that's just, you know, me oversharing as I like to do. But anyway, that's the point. That's why this is a day late, but that's okay. We had a lot of videos go up the last few days. And so I was like, it's all right if I'm off by a day. You know what? Because family is more important. And you guys always remind me of that and encourage me. So even though I'm a very like by the book, literally, or like on time person, I'm like, you know what? Some things you can just take your sweet ass time with and it's all right, right? So before we get into the books, which we do have 9 books to talk about, quite a few rereads as well as some very recent releases. That's basically the exact split. I have some ARCs, some new releases, and then some rereads. That's basically what we have. It's gonna be great. But I would like to welcome Jenny C to my Patreon. Jenny, thank you so much for choosing to support me. Every time someone new joins, it just reaffirms that what I'm doing is worth my time and your time, and that it's something that people actually value. And it means so much to me. So, but also, if you can't support me that way, you are still very important to me. Just by watching this video, liking it, being subscribed, you are also encouraging me to continue. So let's go ahead and dive in. Below me, I have my notes about the books that I talked about, or that I'm about to talk about. So just so you know, if you see me looking down, that is what we're looking at. And the first book I want to talk about, hold on, let me take a drink first, is an author that I read a full-length novel for the first time for the Mafia readathon, which is really cool because I realized that I had read a couple novellas by this author. So this is Jagger Cole, and this was book 2 in his new, I think it's going to be called like Savage Hearts or Brutal Hearts. I don't know what the series is called, but this one was called Vicious Hearts, and this was book 2. I read book 1 and 2 for the readathon. It's just that, you know, I did my weekly wrap up before the readathon was done last week, which, by the way, thank you to everyone who participated in that. It was so much fun. I already can't wait for next year, and I have a lot of new Mafia authors to try and books to try from your suggestions from the readathon, so I just love that. But anyway, this one I was very intrigued to continue, and it's why I kind of pushed aside the rest of my TBR and dived into this one, because this one is about Killian, who is the uncle and the head of one of the mafias from the first one, and he's the one who had like set up his niece's marriage in the first one. And now this begins with him, who Killian is a psychopath, but he definitely has some specific people that he cares about, and I really like how the author was able to show that and kind of make me believe that there was certain people he cared for. I really believe that. But this book begins with Una, who is actually the daughter of our like most hated man ever from the first book, who was killed in the first book. But our heroine is still being manipulated by one of her father's followers. She never cared for her father. He was horrible to her and her brother her whole life. But her brother is being held captive, and she's being told she needs to kill Killian. So she goes undercover to a sex club that Killian goes to every once in a while, and her plan is to tempt him into taking her to a back room and killing him. And that is what we see attempted in the first couple chapters. And she, you know, kind of tailors her look and her likes to what she knows he's into. And then she takes a stab at him, literally. And he is flabbergasted by this, but also then he starts stalking her to find out who this woman is. And when he discovers who she is, he decides that the best way to kind of smooth things over within the Irish mafia would be for him to actually marry her. Because even though the man that we killed in the last book is one of the most evil men that we've come across, even by mafia terms, he still had some people loyal to him based on who his family was and stuff like that. And so he's like, well, if I marry his daughter, then maybe, like, that will help the people who are mad at me, like, be okay with it. And he also is super intrigued by her. And they definitely explore more of the things that they first do at that club when she's undercover, because she isn't completely undercover. She also has a lot of the same, like, desires for that club, but she's never had the chance to try them out. And when he does some of his stalking and his background on her, he discovers that she is actually into a lot of this stuff, so that definitely comes out. So yeah, this is very dark. I do really like how Jagger Cole writes. It is very brutal. I haven't read a mafia romance this brutal in like quite a while. I've read quite a few softer ones, and I don't mean that as a diss, because I don't always want it to go as gut-wrenching as I have read in the past. I'm kind of at a place where I would like it a little bit softer now and then. It's just a bit like easier for me when it's a little bit softer these days. So yeah, it gets pretty dark there. And not necessarily just between the couple, because everything is like either CNC or consensual the whole time. He never like forces her into anything. But there is a lot of darkness in the story. Like her father, he was horrible to her. The things that her and her brother had to live through were horrible. So there are a lot of things that we see with that. But Jagger Cole did have very good trigger warnings at the beginning. There was nothing that was like a huge, like, gut-wrenching surprise. But it is on the more brutal end of things that I've read in a while. But I liked this one even more than the first one. I gave this one 5 stars, and this one was a 4.5 on the Spice rating. And some of the kinks and special things involved included breath play, primal play, impact play, very rough sex, CNC, all of those yummy, yummy things that we tend to love, and I love putting in trope videos, so I love having it. But then some of the trigger warnings are, there's violence, previous essay from from child abuse and things like that, side character death due to drugs, and there's a lot of PTSD and stuff too. So definitely some dark stuff. All right, next up we had one of 3 rereads by this author that I did this last week, because she's just a comfort author for me. And I really need to read some more of her backlist that I haven't read yet. But that's not what was in the cards for this week, okay? So I read Hold by Claire Kent, or reread this book. This is the first book in her Hold series, which is a like prison planet series. Each one is a different kind of like a prison planet and has a different setup, but they're all novellas and they're all set on different planets. But they do have loose links between each of them. And this first one is about our heroine, Rihanna and Kane. And Rihanna is kind of a political prisoner. She was doing some archaeological work, and then like her license was revoked for it, and so she's getting put in this horrible prison planet because of it. And basically any women who get dropped into this prison planet are effed, literally and figuratively. And so when she's being brought in, the guard who's taking her, he does have a little bit of compassion for her, although he's a little bit creepy, but he's like, the best thing you can do is find the strongest man there and make him an offer that you will freely give him your body if he protects you and feeds you. So that is the first thing we're told. And when she gets in there, there's one man who like makes her an offer, but she just doesn't like that one. And she sees a guy who has a private cell, he has his own toilet, and he looks very strong and stoic. And so she sees him and she makes eye contact with him, and she wants to make him this offer. And for a moment it seems like he's not going to take her up on it, but of course he does. And he takes her back to his cell and locks them in, and right away she offers him payment for him taking her in. And so begins this fascinating relationship in the way that really I've only read Claire Kent do, okay? Like I've really only read her do this. There is one other book back when I was like binging like post-apocalyptic style stuff where there's another heroine who's willing to do this. But usually there's so many women where they know that this is the scenario, but then the man is either like too nice to take her up on it, or doesn't really want to push her into anything. Or the heroine is like, are you actually going to make me trade my body for food? And so it ends up being kind of this like high and mighty trip. And we think less of the hero if he would take it, because that's the way the author writes it. But there's something about the way that Claire Kent does this, where the heroine doesn't hesitate because she knows what's at store for her if it doesn't work out. The hero gives her as much dignity as he can, but also like he does expect to get something out of taking care of her and protecting her. And I never think less of him when this exchange is happening, because we see the world that they're living in, and we also see what he is saving her from. And that's what I find fascinating about this book and this series, really, because again, they're all different scenarios. It isn't always a prison that looks like a prison. There's different scenarios that our heroines are in, but I find this book fascinating, and revisiting it was really, like, awesome is the wrong word for it, but I really enjoyed revisiting this. So this one is a 4-star book for me. It is still, like, it's a novella length, so you'll read it fast. There is a 3 on the spice scale for this one. And then for specific kinks or sexy things, I said sex for safety, because I find that kind of sexy when it's a sex deal where both parties are, like, into it. It doesn't feel like dubcon or that, although you could call it coercive sex. Like, you could call it that, and some people might. But I also think that we all trade something for safety and security, right? For us who have jobs, it's our time and our energy. And for many people all over the world, it's their bodies that they trade. And a lot of them willingly. It's not always something people are forced into. So I find the examination of this very interesting. And we're going to talk about another one like that shortly here. So, but there is trigger warnings in, like, there is threat of assault to this heroine at any moment. If Kane isn't able to protect her enough, she could literally just be physically destroyed by these men, all these desperate men. All right, then I finished my arc for Save One Thing by J. Wolfe. This book is out now. It came out on the 11th. It took me a while to get through this arc. And I don't mean necessarily because the book was slow, but at the end of the months, I always get all my arcs just kind of like dumped at once. And I'm always excited for them, but it still can be kind of overwhelming when you get them all dumped at once and trying to finish other stuff. So this one I like put off because I was like, it doesn't come out till May 11th, so I can take my time. But this is the first in the new series that J. Wolfe is doing, which is a spin-off from Savage, what's that one series called? I don't remember the first series, and then there's Savage U, and then this one is Savage Academy. And so this one, we're going back to a high school setting, which the first series that J. Wolfe did was a high school setting as well. And we have 2 younger siblings of previous characters. So we have Luciana, who is the younger sister of Helen. I mean, she basically had been, like, adopted by Theo and Helen, and they're her legal guardians. And they have a baby in this one. It's very cute. And then we have Beckett, who is the younger brother of Julian from book 4, Real Like Daydreams. And they're both going to Savage Academy, and he is a soccer player and she is a field hockey player. So they're both into sports. She is choosing to not have boyfriends in high school, at least at the beginning of this one. And Beckett has been pining for her since he first met her when they were young teens. And we do get some flashbacks to that. So yeah, this one has him finally trying to make a move on her. Like, he has been very respectful and has waited because he knows she didn't want a boyfriend at this time. He also at one point did something that makes it seem like he hates her, but it really was to kind of protect her soccer playing career, or field hockey, sorry, playing career, even though she doesn't see it that way in the beginning. And it definitely is a bold choice that he makes. It definitely is a bold choice that he makes, but he is so into her. And I really did love watching them both come to that realizations, and like he is so in. Where this one was like a little bit tough for me was for how into her he is and how devoted to her he is. The third act breakup scenario just had me shaking my head at Beckett. I was like, what are you doing, kid? What are you doing? But again, they're teenagers. Teenagers are volatile. They don't always make the best decisions. And what I did love was how the heroine then reacts to it, because she's really reluctant to this relationship for a lot of it. But then when Theo is the one having some doubts, she does really kind of step in and do some great things for him. I don't know another way to say that, but she really proves how she feels back, and I really appreciated that. So I did give this one 4 stars. It was a 2.5 on a spice scale. This one has double virgins, which I really enjoyed, and it has that thing of like discovering your sexuality and just trying all the new things. So often I feel like even if like the heroine's a virgin, the hero isn't, or vice versa, honestly. And it's like one person teaching someone everything. And what I loved about this one is them both just being like, ooh, should we try this? Should we do this? Should we do that? And that's how I imagine it would be for, you know, 2 teenagers who are finally getting to act out on all their desires together. All right, next I listened to a new release that this was one I didn't get an arc for. I've shared this in a previous video, so I don't want to like spiral again about it, but there have been some authors and some like PR companies that they've really had to like claw back the amount of arcs that they've done, especially for authors who've gotten a lot more popular. There are copywriting concerns and pirating concerns, and so it can be a little more cutthroat getting an arc for some things. But honestly, as I've said before too, that's been okay because my workload is pretty high. And so even though there's always that little bit of like, oh, I didn't get picked, like that does hurt a little bit, and it's perfectly valid for you to feel that. But we're not owed arcs. And here's the thing, I'm still plenty happy to either buy that book or read a Kindle, you know, or a Kindle unlimited version of it. So I don't have any problems doing that. The book, let's talk about the book. It was Runaway Love by Melanie Harlow. This was on my TBR either way. And this one is the first in Cherry Tree Harbor is the series name. Yes, we won't totally talk about the cover. I've already ranted about it in my upcoming releases video before. But I was excited that the audio was released same day. Melanie Harlow's gotten really good with that. Quite a few authors are also closing that gap for when the audiobook's released for something. So that's great. And this one involves a runaway bride named Veronica who, the day of her wedding, discovers her husband is cheating. Also, she really examines like why she's about to marry this man, and it's a case of her mother, who has recently passed away, really wanted her to be taken care of, and this heroine also used to be a rockette, and the hero really not the hero, her ex-fiance, because we'll call him that, he really fixated on her, and she was really hard for him to win, and that kind of made him want her even more. And when he couldn't have her, he really turned on the charm to try to win her, you know, and he did what he needed to do to get her, and then just kind of dumped her. Well, no, he was going to marry her, but then like was going to have the affairs that he wanted to have, and she was going to be a status symbol to him. So she leaves him at the altar, and he cuts her off, takes her car, takes her home, takes all her money, and she is left with nothing. And so this begins with her needing to find a job, and the small town that they happen to be in where her wedding was going to happen has Austin, who is a single dad to twins, and his sister, who is going to be his nanny for the summer, has just gotten an opportunity to do an archaeological dig that she just can't pass up on. So now he doesn't have a nanny for the summer, and a little of this, a little of that, and Veronica becomes his nanny. So yeah, it has a lot of the tropes that we so dearly love, right? It has a single dad, it has a nanny, it has sexual tension, it has cute kids, it has us being introduced to the family that I'm sure will be in the subsequent books coming. But for me, this one was missing something. And I think part of it might be that Tempt was arguably my favorite Melanie Harlow. And I just thought that that slow burn, even though that starts with a one-night stand, but like that slow burn between these two and the communication and the budding relationship between those two was so great. And this one, you know, I've heard a lot of people say like it's just written for the tropes. Well, that's where a lot of authors get their ideas for stuff. It's like, oh, I'm going to write this type of a story. And I think that Melanie Harlow does pretty good writing to the tropes that are popular and still writing a book I really love. Like when she wrote X's Dad, Plus Size Heroine, like those are writing to, you know, to specific tropes as well. And I liked them. And I don't know, there was just a little something missing from this one that I just, you know, didn't know what to do with it. And then when things went from sexual tension to sexy times between them to a third act conflict and like breakup scenario, it all just, the dominoes fell really quickly, and I just didn't feel enough love between them for the scenario they're put into. And then bam, we're together at the end. I don't know. It just didn't make me feel it the way that I have with other Melanie Harlow. So this is one of my least favorite in recent like history with hers, and I hate saying it, but I've read better, and I know she can write better for me. And based on some reviews, like I know I'm not the only one, but also anytime you have a certain view about a book, there's someone who agrees with your view. That's how it goes with some stuff, right? So yeah, I ended up giving this one a 3.5 star, and it was a 2.5 on the spice scale. Okay, sorry, had to move something. I hope my shot is the same there. All right, then we had some more rereads all in a row because I was still just in a bit of a funk, and so we went with it. And luckily, one of the beautiful things about my Patreon is the rereads that I get to do for my viewers. So one of the rereads for this month was Stolen Touches by Neva Altaj. This one is book 5 in the Perfectly Imperfect series, and this one is between Malene, who is actually the younger sister of Bianca from book 2, which is my favorite one in the series, and Salvatore, who is the heads of one of the other mafias. And Malene, she's been a bit of a naughty girl. She has been in a city that she is not supposed to be in as the daughter of a capo from a different mafia, and she's been there going to school, and I believe like doing because she's going to be a nurse, and she isn't supposed to be in the city that she's in. She could cause a lot of problems doing that, being in this city. And part of it has to do with her family. Bianca's father, her and Bianca's father pissed off a lot of people and made a lot of bad choices, and so they're really not allowed in this city at all. But what happens is actually kind of a chance encounter where Tor, he happens to be coming out of the hospital from a checkup. He is an amputee, like below the knee, I think, on one of his legs. And so he was coming in for a checkup, and when he's leaving, this woman runs up to this car that has stopped in the parking lot in the wrong part of the hospital, and there's a woman having a baby in the backseat, and she's only there with her 15-year-old son who had to drive the car there, and she literally asks for his coat and uses it to deliver this baby, and he's just wowed by this woman. And Tor doesn't usually feel things, and he's curious about this woman, and so he does kind of start stalking her and sending her ridiculous amounts of flowers and things like that, and then he discovers who she is. And so for a while, he just keeps an eye on her and actually makes his presence known again, and they're flirting a little, and she actually almost goes home with him one night when they get shot at. And now that his enemies, number one, see that he is around this woman, and number two, like they know who she is, he forces her into marriage with him. And so that, you know, from her side, ruins a lot of the attraction for her right off the bat, a lot of the feeling she was having for him. A lot of that is just cut off at the knees in this scenario, which is kind of a bummer. But it's also then gives us a chance of like, now they're in this forced proximity and she had to move in with him, and he's now going about wooing her in some different ways, because she's like, we're never gonna sleep together, it's never happening. But you know, he walks around without a shirt on a lot and like working out, and It is really difficult because she's had to then like immediately give up her career because she can't go out of hospital. It's not possible for him to protect her at work. But there's like opportunities for her to use her talents in other ways. Let's just say that. And yeah, this is another great one in the series. This one is a 5-star for me. It's a 3.5 on the spice scale, and definitely some trigger warnings for OCD, violence, and gore in this one for sure. Then I reread another Claire Kent, and I reread Princess by Claire Kent, which this one I haven't reread, I think, since I first read it. This one is actually book 2 in the Haven, or the Kindle series, sorry. And this one is an age gap. I mean, pretty much like most of Claire Kent's books are age gaps somehow. And this one is about Olivia, and we get to see a different side of the apocalypse that is happening from the side of kind of extreme wealth. So Olivia is going to college, she's a swimmer, she's living her life when her father sends a bodyguard named Grant to pick her up and take her to this bunker where the like asteroid is going to hit Earth very soon. And so like literally it's on the course, it's going to hit soon. And we know from other books in this series what happened after that happened is like the dust cloud and the poisons in the air, and everything became very uninhabitable for a very long time. But being the daughter of the ultra wealthy, they were able to secure a spot in one of those like underground silo bunkers, and everyone is able to be safely locked in for the next 4 to 5 years. And so then we pretty quickly skip through some time. The beginnings of a lot of her books in this series do that. You know, they show us what things were before and then where we're at as we build up to time. And so we see her pretty quickly lose her father. We aren't super attached to him. That's also something that Claire Kent does. We don't usually dwell on death too much. There are definitely deaths in these stories, but it's not gratuitous or like overly, you know, lingered over, because it's more about how the interpersonal relationships during these times like work out, you know, which again, I find fascinating. And so now really the only one left that she knows is Grant, but he's always kept himself like very apart from her. You know, he was her like bodyguard for that bit in the beginning, but now he's someone who like works for this company that like set up this silo, like he was a hired worker for that. And once everyone's in this silo, there are a lot of rules. It's not overly dictatorial, but everyone does their job to get the food you want, to have the things you need. It's still a pretty plush place to be. Like there is a pool there. They're able to have a coffee bar where everyone can get their coffee for the day. They have plenty of food for even rationing. And they have pretty nice apartments and stuff. So it's not the harsh conditions that some of our other survivors have been living in other books in this series. But as it does, shit hits the fan eventually. It doesn't matter how much money you had in the beginning, you know, everything is equalized eventually, you know. And as we get closer and closer to like the current timeline, you know, the people inside are getting restless. There are diseases that go through when you're in tight quarters. And there are also raiders and those wolf packs that are roaming that we have to worry about. So then there is also the crazy sexual tension between Grant and Olivia. And, you know, are they going to act on it? Which, I mean, of course they do. And is this another case of like Grant sees it as her being protected by him, and that's why she's giving her body, whereas like she's been into Grant since she like first met him when she was 19, and now it's been quite a few years. So I love this one. This one is a 5-star read for me. It's a 3 on the spice scale, and this one probably has some of the more like hottest sex in the series. Like she has good amount of sex in each of these books, and it's all very, I always say there's like awkward sex in these. There is like the, you know, mechanical stuff sometimes that can make it unsexy, but I find sexy at the same time. And we're going to talk about another book that does that in just a second. But I just find it fascinating. And so this one, Grant definitely brings out some of the praise and like good girl stuff happens, and very much helping her expand her sexual repertoire with him. And I love that. I love this one quite a bit. Then I reread the next book that was for a patron, which happened to be a Claire Kent. So you can see I read way more Claire Kent than I needed to this week, but I was just in a mood for her, and so it worked out. So one of my patrons asked me to annotate Escorted by Claire Kent, which is a fascinating book by her, because this one is about a male escort named Ander, but we're not in his POV. We are in Lori's POV, who is an author in her, I think she's in her late 20s. She's a very, actually, like, famous author, but she's still a virgin. And so she gets a referral from some other women who have used Ander's services before, because he only takes appointments by referral. And she hires him to divest her of her virginity. I don't want to say take her virginity, but help her divest herself of her virginity. And so she, you know, meets him at this hotel for the first time. Well, actually, first they meet for coffee the first time, and it's so interesting because, like, Lori makes things, like, super uncomfortable in the beginning, and I almost forgot, like, how annoyed I was with her in the beginning. But at the same time, how do you actually act when you are hiring a man to have sex with you? And, you know, in just the way that anytime a sex worker is hired, like, you know, they're not giving you the real them, nor do they have to. They can put on whatever persona or act that they would like to help them do their job. Like, they don't owe you themselves. They owe you the services you're paying for, right? Which still need to be consensual, but that's not the game with this one. So we don't have to worry about any of that. But what is fascinating is, like, Ander, you know, he has all of these tools and all of these things in his, you know, repertoire, like what he would do, like what women like. They like a fantasy. They want a book boyfriend. They want, you know, this and this to be reenacted. But really the way that Lori wants it is she's like, I don't want anything to be fake as much as we can. Like, let's do this as matter-of-factly as we can. And so that is the experience that she's in for, with him, you know, explaining everything that he's doing and talking her through things and helping her understand her own body better and helping her achieve orgasm to the best of her ability. And he's very matter-of-fact, but very gentle and respectful with her. And they have this fascinating dynamic. And those parts of Lori that made me feel very awkward in the beginning, where she, you know, without even meaning to, will kind of take certain, like, digs at him, and you're just like, shut up, Lori, you're so awkward. And as with all Claire Kent books, I have not read a single one of her books that didn't have this. It becomes very clear to us, the reader, that Ander has much deeper feelings for her than she sees, even though she wants him to have deep feelings for her, because she continues to see this man and pay him for his services, but she's falling for him. And so there are at different points where she tries to cut herself off from him because she's feeling things, but then she doesn't want to be away from him because she's formed this relationship. But is it all fake, or is there more going on? And sometimes she says hurtful things, sometimes he says hurtful things. And all the while we're exploring her sexuality and their sexuality together, and, like, what they can be together. Like, And do they even have a hope of having a relationship after her having paid him for sex for so long, you know? So yeah, this is a fascinating look. And anyone who's read an escort romance before and been intrigued by it, I highly, highly recommend this book, and I'm so glad that I revisited it. And I remember when I read this that it led me to quite a few other male escort romances, and there are even some more that I want to try that I haven't got to yet, because honestly, I think the job of sex work is so fascinating to dive into, both the really, like, horrendous, painful parts of it, where people are taken advantage of, and then the people who are totally in control of themselves and what they allow to happen and how that goes, right? So yeah, this was a 5-star read for me, and it's a 4 on the spice scale. The thing I will say is that the spice scale for this one definitely has to do with quantity, although there is some great quality later on. But this one, because usually I've shared, like, with my spice scale, 4 usually means we're involving some kink for me. This one doesn't necessarily have kink, but for the volume of sex, there is sex in every chapter in this book. a lot of it mechanically explained, a lot of it, you know, but because this is an escort romance, the sex journey and the way that the sex evolves each time it's had really is the story that we're visiting. So yes, of course, it's still written in a titillating fashion in some ways, but this isn't as erotic as it sounds by how I explain this. Like, I would still probably categorize this as an erotic romance because of the fact that the story doesn't happen without the sex in it, because that's what this is, but it's still written differently than other erotic romance. So I don't know what to say. Maybe that's completely turned you off, which is totally fine. You maybe shouldn't read this book if you don't want to see their journey through their sex interactions. But if you're someone who likes escort romances, or you like watching how sex can evolve from being awkward when there's no feelings to when there is just bursting with feelings, it's amazing. Like, it's so beautiful. I love watching it happen. So yeah, this one's a 5-star read, and it's a 4 on the spice scale. All right, then I read Compromised by Amber Knight. This was one I was really excited to read. I saw this book advertised or like mentioned in one of the Facebook groups I'm in. There aren't a ton of Facebook groups that I keep up with, but I am still amazed at the size of some Facebook groups are just huge. And there's this group, I've mentioned it before, that's called Upturned Petticoats and Undone Cravats, and it's all about spicy romance that is 3 chili peppers or higher. And sometimes they have authors who drop in, and one of these authors was sharing about her upcoming historical romance. I think she previously only wrote like paranormal romance, but I think most of it is all interracial. And this one, I saw this beautiful cover and I really wanted to try it, so I signed up for an ARC for this. And this one has an interesting scenario. We have Sir Perrin, who has an estate and he has a home, and it's been left to him by his, I don't want to say mistress, but kind of his, like the woman who took care of him and was kind of a mother figure, but also he was at one point like owned by her and her husband, and then the husband died. And then the woman died and she left this to him, and he was able to own it and keep it. So he has this, he has a few servants who run it with him. And I think he's in his early 40s is how I did, because this one is an age gap. So he owns this place. And then we have Felicity, who is supposedly a ruined woman. She was caught in a compromising position. She didn't even know like what was happening though, but she was caught alone with this man like in the stable. And so now she's ruined, absolutely ruined. And so her family is sending her away. Her aunt is sending her away in shame. I don't think she has her parents anymore. And there is this posting where she can be basically a maid, and that's where they're sending her. And so she gets hired at this estate to be a maid. And pretty much as soon as she gets there, there's this really crazy chemistry between her and Sir Perrin. And she comes across him in the library one night because she wants to go find a book to read. She's been told she can read whatever she wants. And he's in the library pleasuring himself, and she watches, and he likes that she watches. And so now it kind of becomes a thing where night after night she comes to watch him, and either he will like get himself off or watch her get herself off, and it starts evolving from there until there is really something happening between them. So I struggle with how to like talk about this book, because I was super intrigued by the premise, and by this coupling just fascinated me. I was like, oh, I want to read this type of situation. But, and I'm not saying the situation is supposed to make you comfortable, but it isn't them being an interracial couple that made me uncomfortable. Let me be clear. It is how the hero acts in the last like 5th of this book that made me want to chuck my Kindle, because I hated him. I hated the decisions he made. And it drove me nuts. So that's really where this one went for me. I was very much into the first, what's the opposite of 20%? The first 80% of this book. I really liked it. It's not overly long, so like it moves pretty quickly. But I also really felt like he was taking advantage of her. And I know that some of the complexities in this story are like he's someone who's been taken advantage of before. Not in necessarily the same way that he's doing to her, but he was almost this woman's pet. And yes, she left him this estate and left him this money, but he's still like an outcast to the town, the place that he lives. I mean, he may have money, but people reluctantly take it. So there's all of those shades of, you know, racism and like separate and like trying to keep him out. You know, they want his money, but like they charge him more for stuff than they do other people. Like our heroine goes to town to do a little bit of shopping for him, and because they know where she's from, they like charge her more for things. So, you know, there's all those layers which are complex and definitely worth like breaking down. But then there's the way that he's taking advantage of her. And she is pretty ignorant to her body and to things. And he tempts her into them and pushes her further every time. And even when she's very reluctant into things, and just because her body's feeling things, like he honestly felt a little bit predatory to me. And like that made me uncomfortable. And then there's a situation that she gets put into, and I'm going to put up a spoiler card here because this book isn't out yet, so I don't want to ruin it for you, but it is one of my like triggers, so I need to share it with you. But here's the spoiler card. Just skip until that's gone if you don't want to know. There is a surprise baby in this book after our hero has kind of abandoned her because she's having feelings for him, and he's like, I'm out. We're not going to have love between us. That's not going to happen. And again, I know there's more layers to that. There's him thinking nothing can be between them because of his race and those things. But he is the more experienced person in this. And he just, this woman that he tempted into these things, he abandons her as soon as she has feelings, but he's already left his seed behind. And now she's just completely abandoned and doesn't know what to do. She turns to someone she knows could help her have an abortion if she needed it. She definitely contemplates doing that because she has nowhere to go. And so I understand to a point, like maybe where the author was going with his reluctance to this and his being like, oh, this child is like doomed or any of that. But that doesn't mean that it makes him likable that he shows back up. And there was absolutely no groveling. He was just like, okay, let's get married and we'll be together and it's fine. There was none of that. And then the story was over. So all of the stuff I was loving about their dynamic and the things he was teaching her, and there's also like the forbidden aspect because she's his employee. So like all of these things, to then have him just be like, you need to leave probably because you're in love with me and I can't have feelings. It just made him feel pretty icky. And so I didn't like that because I really wanted to give this book a glowing review because I was so intrigued by what was going on, and then I was just kind of disappointed by that. So I gave this one 3.5, and I'm rounding it up to a 4 for my review because you guys know, like, I don't want to trash an author, and I like that this was different in some ways than other stuff I've read, but it also is the fact that, like, it has a lot of tropes I don't love in it. It also very much felt like a mistress trope because it was like, oh, I'm teaching you all these sexual things, but there's never going to be more between us. So it definitely had that going on. And that's just something that ends up not making me feel great. So yeah, this one was a 3.5. It was a 2.5 on the spice scale. And there are those trigger warnings for racism and sexism, talk of an abortion by a side character, possibility of an abortion for a main character, and the hero did not grovel enough for me. So yeah, unfortunately didn't love that as much as I wanted to. All right, and then the last book that I wanted to talk about, this one was also a disappointing read, so that kind of sucks. I read Zayn by Ella Frank. This is, I mean, technically this is book like 8 or 9 in this series, but like it's book 2 in the current like trilogy that's coming out. And this is an MMF trilogy, and so there is a couple, this male couple that's been together for a while, and then we have Chloe, who is the daughter of like heroes from previous books. And in the first book, she agreed to enter into a dom-sub relationship with this couple. They have braceleted her, you know, they've collared her, made her theirs. And at the end of the last book, we had kind of a cliffhanger because they went to this party where one of the heroes is the son of a like senator or something who very much is very like right-wing and conservative, and his son being gay was already a big enough problem. And then he shows up at this party not only with his partner, but their new third. And it's very clear that he's with both of them. And so the father is very disturbed. Now, not only is that happening, but Julian, who is, you know, an executive chef and is Chloe's one of her fathers, he's the one catering this event. And so her father and her papa, like, they see her there with these two men. So that was the cliffhanger we were left off with. So we come into this one where her fathers want to meet these men and all that stuff. And I mean, that's fine and good. Of course they want to. But number one, they were super judgmental of this scenario, even though they live in it themselves. And we keep reminding ourselves, this is the same kind of relationship that my fathers are in. Why is it a big deal? And just the way that, like, they were all acting, like, I know they would be protective, and, like, I love protective dads, but they were also being, like, unreasonable to a lot of it, when I'm like, you literally had 4 books about getting people to accept you guys as a triad, and you won't even, like, hear your daughter out for a lot of it, which was annoying. And then kind of where it just spiraled out of control. The dialogue in this one felt more stilted than any previous book by Ella Frank that I've read. There was no chemistry in the sex scenes, and we have menage sex scenes happening. I didn't feel anything for a lot of these. And then we were asking her to move in at the end of this book, when I feel like they've been together for 2 weeks maybe, and she's supposed to move in with the 2 of them. And of course there's still one more book going. This one has a happy for now at the end of it. But of course we have to have a 3rd book because we have to have one called Chloe. And I am excited for that. I'm excited to see what Chloe looks like on the cover of this book. I'm ready for it. But I didn't feel like anything progressed in their relationship at all. The BDSM stuff would just come in and out whenever they felt like it. It wasn't like a dynamic that was set, but then all of a sudden she lips back too much and they're like, now you're gonna be punished. And I was like, I didn't know we were living in a 24/7 dynamic. We haven't really like set up rules. And if you're going to have BDSM where there are rules, because sometimes, right, we read a book like Vicious Hearts at the beginning, Raymond, they don't follow the rules. They just do elements of BDSM whenever they want to. That's a different scenario. You have rules, you have things set up, you have callers, and you have things. And there was no like parameters of when it was happening. We would just act on it whenever, right? And that was a bit disturbing for me. I didn't like that. I didn't like that much at all. So anyway, I ended up actually giving this one 2.5 stars. And it was also like barely a 2 on the spice scale, because there was a lot of fade to black sex scenes. And again, the sex scenes we did have, I just did not feel the chemistry. And I'm pretty disappointed because I've loved Ella Frank in the past. I've given some of her books 5 stars. I've loved previous books in this series so much. But this one just was not sexy. And I don't know if she's just not feeling this setup, this throuple. But it wasn't working for me either. And like, besides, like I said, wanting to see the cover of Chloe and what that looks like, I don't know that I want to read that book, even though I want to see what the cover looks like. I don't know if I want to read it. So there we go. So anyway, there we go. Those are all the books that I read this week. Thank you so much for watching. I hope if you are a mother, you had a wonderful Mother's Day. You absolutely deserve it. I hope if you have a mother that you sent her some love. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this. Thank you to my patrons and channel members who support me. And thank you for watching this. And I'll see you next time. Bye.